self-location became a reality. A number of students moved into places called home that are overcrowded. It meant that they did not have a dedicated space to study. The place of home was never really arranged in the manner that it can be both for work but also for study, which affected both ourselves as academic workers, but also as for students as well. And the level of distraction that we also found ourselves in, being at home. When you're at home, you're expected to be a mother, you're expected to be a parent, you're expected to be a lover, and so on. And there are chores that you have to also perform, which means that there's high levels of distraction, both for work, but also for study purposes. And this is what was communicated by both students and staff, that there's high levels, very, very high levels of distraction, which are ranging really, as you can see in that orange and yellow and green coverage there. So the level of distraction at home, place, and shelter, because many of us also were displaced, because it was assumed that if you are a teaching worker, you have a salary, you have a capable home that can hold this, what we call teaching and learning, but it was not the case. The majority of us who are migrants in South Africa immediately were thrown into the deep end. A majority of us that come from vulnerable townships and rural areas were thrown into this deep end, including students, where there's high levels of noise when you are teaching, overcrowding in our households, having to run errands in between teaching, distraction from family members, and chores, loud music from neighbors as well, were some of the things that we're experiencing. The network being bad, making it very, very difficult to access online platforms, comparatively when you are at the university. Neighbors visiting you don't even understand what you mean when you're talking about this online learning, sitting in the space whilst you're teaching. And of course, alienating issues of neighborhood, the whole issue of having no space. A student was saying, I live with my grandmother who is sick and I have to take care of her. So it is causing a lot of distraction. We are just two men in one space. There's no privacy and so much noise. And the issue of hunger and starvation, just the fact that being out of residencies meant that there's no food at home for students. And parents, one of them was saying, my parents are always drunk and fighting when I try to study. And it's a number of students that are saying this, but also academic staff then having to deal with these issues. So we had to, at the same time, then act as social workers, wellness workers, at the same time as we're navigating the terrain of teaching and learning, and high levels of stress, even amongst ourselves. So the challenges were not really about the platforms that we are using, because UKZN has always used blended learning even before COVID hit us. We were ahead of time in that sense. So most of the students were very familiar with Moodle, 97%, were comfortable moving online, so they did not need any training at all to be able to use Moodle whilst at home. So those were not the issues. Introducing Zoom, though, became a little bit of an issue in a sense that some of our students did not have any experience of using Zoom. Even us as teaching workers, about 89.4%, even though there was a level of familiarity with the software, but the fact that you don't use it every day, it means that you're not able to navigate it. And of course, people then needed training and support to be able to use Zoom comparatively to Moodle. And that UTLO has done a lot of work to make sure that that kind of support was granted.
10 minutes.
4 minutes, thank you. So then the issue of access to resources like the library, the content that students are using, is something that remains a challenge, where students are not able to access databases and journals, using the online platform at the university, even though they are familiar with these platforms, but they're not really using them. Very, very few actually familiar, 1.7% of students and academic staff that we spoke to. So what we then thought we would do, we introduced WhatsApp groups. WhatsApp groups have always been a social platform to say, how would it be if we use WhatsApp to be able to then mitigate these issues of communication, issues of access. And we found that a number of students actually do belong to these WhatsApp groups. something that some of us had never used before. And we had to now start navigating platforms like WhatsApp and other social media platforms for teaching purposes and for learning and for communication with students. And that worked. So you can see there that we then mitigated in these ways that we did not just use Moodle. 43.2% of our work of teaching and learning was on Moodle, but largely we communicated with students, and we continue to do so via email, which is still a very high percentage in terms of communication, but also WhatsApp. More than 36% of our students were able to reach via WhatsApp. It's particularly that strata that is not able to access online contact Zoom sessions where you are live in this manner, you're talking to each other because of communication problems. And students have got mixed feelings about moving online, even ourselves. Some of them, very, very few, are feeling very positive about online teaching, that 8.4% during COVID, and some feeling sort of positive, but a lot are neutral. Students are still really thinking, even academic staff, to say, is the online teaching working, or is it not working? Some are still very stuck in that place of neutrality, mainly because of issues of reliability in terms of internet, but also in terms of plagiarism and so on. So what we found, as I'm about to sort of wrap up, is that very, very few students have a very reliable internet connection, which means then for us as academic staff, we have to go an extra mile, right? We have to find mechanisms and ways in which students can be reached. And one of the recommendations that we are making is that I think it's important to go an extra mile and do pre-recorded lectures, which is something that we are doing, and put materials and recorded lectures on Moodle, because that strata of students, that is about 90% of students who are not able to access Zoom sessions because of connectivity issues, are able to go back, even though they have that somewhat unreliable connectivity. Sometimes they do connect and then they can catch up. But WhatsApp student groups do offer some kind of interactive contact with students who are not able to access Zoom due to poor network connectivity. But what it then does to us as teaching workers, as academic staff, is that you have to go an extra mile, unfortunately, because WhatsApp groups means that you're communicating beyond the call of duty, in a sense that it's not your 9 to 5 type of communication. You communicate sometimes on weekends, sometimes at night, especially during load shedding. So it really is about...
Can I ask you to conclude? Sorry.
No problem. This is going to be my last slide. So, okay. So in conclusion then, to say it requires us to be empathetic to the call of teaching and respond to and engage with emails, and the basic need vouchers for students and their families at home is something that we recommend for the university to engage the department and the Ministry of Education, because issues of starvation and hunger do stop students from attending lectures, and of course affect us as well. And lastly, Chair, basic household unkept internet access is a necessity to ensure digital equity, especially in this digital era of the fourth industrial revolution. Our sense is that internet has become a basic need for every household. When students are not at home, those who are not in residencies, it is useful to have unkept basic internet service that is offered by the Ministry of Education to ensure that equity is enabled, so that we do not have less than 10% of students attending our Zoom sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fikile. Thank you for unpacking all those challenges, which I think we have all become very familiar with over the past 20 months or so. Is there anybody who would like to now start sort of a question session? Anybody got any questions for Fikile with what she has unpacked for us? Thank you, Elaine.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to get some clarification on the data that you collected. Was that from 2020, all the data that you presented?
Yes, this is data that we collected in 2020. And I think now that it is 2021, a lot has happened in the last couple of months in terms of devices, but also in terms of connectivity. So we would need to go back and check if anything has changed.
Yeah, I was going to ask what your perspective was on the change from a year like a year later, a lot has happened. And just to clarify, this is also just for the political science students that you've analyzed, right? They're not outside of that discipline?
It is the School of Social Sciences.
Okay.
So it includes quite a number of other disciplines as well within the school.
And my understanding at UKZN is that any student outside of the maybe STEM fields that require lab are still not on campus. Is that correct? Currently?
Sorry, please ask that again.
Are the students in your division, are they still off campus living at home, or are they back on campus? My understanding is that STEM students are back for labs, but maybe not the others. I just wanted to get clarification on that.
Yes, we do have students that are now back in residencies, which does change the situation a little bit. I think it will absolutely change this data, but some of the students are still at home because the manner in which you have to come back on campus, there's a criteria that students have got to fulfill. So not everybody is back on residencies. So we still have quite a majority of students that are still at home and in place and in shelter.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Sangweni, go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you so much. Hi, thank you, Spigelia, for that presentation. I wanted to find out, I was also curious about when you collected the data, because I think when you go back, as since you said you will go back, I'm not sure if how many people have considered this, but I think another question, an important one that students need to be asked is, have they dealt with a COVID-related death in the family, given what has happened? Now, the reason why I think that question needs to be asked is because such a thing like that may affect a student mentally, and the fact that they were at home might even be prolonged that mental distress, and whether they seek help for that, and because sometimes a death in the family can be hard, but it's sometimes easier if you're at rest, removed from the situation. But the fact that they were at home as well might also add to that. So I think when you go back, I think it might be another question to consider when you're asking the students. So it's just a suggestion that you may consider when you go back.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, Snetemba. No, absolutely. I mean, there are students, quite a number of students that have experienced death. Social issues. I think one of the things that we found out when we did this, this has been sort of a rolling survey that we did, but we also then looked at the social impact of being at home for students, including things like death, being caregivers, particularly for girl students who carry the burden of care within the family, and how then they get to be a part of the cohort that always has to find themselves catching up, using the catch-up program comparatively to other genders. And and then the issue of food and hunger and starvation, and the fact that hustling became also a part of students, because students then to find themselves having to work for families, going back at home. Some of the students are breadwinners, some of the students are child-headed households. And of course, then it means that their focus is divided, and therefore there is impact that is directly seen in the way that they're performing. I fully agree with you, and I think your suggestion is appreciated.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. That was just my suggestion. Good.
Any other questions? I think for myself, as we talk, I realized, I was receiving personally receiving a lot of requests from students during the course of last year to return to campus. And so I can confirm a number of the issues that you have raised, because these are issues that students raised when they were seeking permission to return to campus, to go into residencies. And I think that potentially is a whole other study in itself, to look at more fully unpack the implications for them of being at home, the implications on their study, and how far-reaching those implications are, in fact, The other thing I found interesting was in your recommendations at the end. I think a lot more work could be done and will be done, I'm sure, on if we are, because of the nature of our environment and what you found, the circumstances in which students live, this whole concept of moving to a blended learning approach, which seems to be favored by the school, by the university, becomes much more difficult when you recognize the difficulties that students have in studying at home. And it certainly is clear that it's not for everybody. That it can't be for everybody. Those are just my personal views. I haven't done a study. We did, in fact, do a survey with our students early in 2021, in fact, our postgraduate group. And I can tell you that a lot of the earlier slides that you showed in terms of, access to technologies and that sort of thing would be very, very similar amongst our group. So the findings were very similar in our survey that we undertook. Mr. Dlamini?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to just add a comment on what has been presented already. As an ADO in the discipline of ISNT, what I have noticed is that with the whole migration to online learning, a lot of students, right, as much as we understand that they can be having challenges with connectivity and all that, but I feel, and I think I have noticed that they make this an excuse, right? So there's just this lack of responsibility from the part of students in terms of doing their work. So if we consider the fact that students have been given things like data to join classes, but what we have seen is that with that particular data, the students are not using them accordingly. They will just use the data for their own personal stuff, and then they don't want to attend. They're not attending, most of them. And then, as an academic, it gets to a point where there is difficulty in balancing your duty to the student, and then maybe assisting the student. I don't know how the university can deal with this, because for us as academics on the other side, with this whole thing of online learning, we have a lot of work. I just wish students can understand that there is a lot of work. When you look at things like preparing assessments, for an example, so lecturers can tell you what it takes to just prepare a test for students. But then students, they decide not to pitch. And then they'll make an excuse of this whole thing of load shedding. So I guess the difficulty now is, how do we then really make students to be responsible for their own education, not to be giving excuses every time? Yes, there are students who are having challenges, but majority of these kids, they are not having challenges. They are just making excuses. Because when we leave the office, we go outside, we can see what they are doing.
I think we need to, I think we need to draw this discussion to a close, because we have to try, we already started 15 minutes late, and we have to try and keep keep to our schedule as much as possible. I hear what you say, and I'm sure any of us who are teaching here have thoughts on that as well. But I think we do need to move on with the program. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for Keely. I think we're going to move on to the next speaker now, which is Dr. Jerry, if I'm saying it correctly. Apologies if my pronunciation is not good. The paper is titled Understanding Academics' Attitude Towards the Adoption of ICTs in Higher Education Institutions in the COVID-19 Era. So I will hand over to Dr. Jerry.
Okay.
Again, sorry, Doctor, I will tell you when you have 5 minutes left, and I'll ask you to conclude if we're getting near the end of time.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues, for being in attendance of this presentation. So as Patsy has said, my name is Joseph, and I'm presenting to you a study that looks at evaluating students' use behavior of social media for teaching and learning in the COVID era. So when you look at the times that we now actually existing in, we're existing in a very unprecedented period of time, especially for higher ed. Higher ed is going through a lot of changes. A lot of people have not, nobody has actually ever experienced this before, and especially in the way that we actually teach. So around 2010, I'd started a project on the flipped classroom where we record videos, give students to look at those videos, and then we try and make the classroom more open to a discussion environment. That project ran for some time, but due to technical issues, it actually stopped. Now we find ourselves in the period of COVID, and everybody, all the academics are thrust into this fourth industrial revolution period, and everybody has to adopt, students and staff. One of the things that that has started happening is that academics are sitting and having these conversations and saying, look, how do we get to our students? They say, oh, no, students use Instagram. Let's go and teach on Instagram. Students are using Facebook. Let's take the material on Facebook. Students are using all of these social media platforms, and academics are thinking, you know what, if they don't come into the classroom, we don't see them in the classroom, let's try and follow them onto their platforms and actually, see how we can actually attract them to conduct some teaching and learning on the platforms that this modern student is familiar with. So this is that was the motivation behind it, where I try to seek to understand the use behavior of social media for based on a student perspective for the teaching and learning activities. So what is the purpose of the study? Now the purpose of the study is to investigate students' adoption of social media platforms for teaching and learning purposes in universities. What was the study takes a very quantitative approach, as is my background. So I was looking at the first year students, new entrants into the university. In the commerce faculty, we have about just over 400 students that come in as first years. Why first years is because specifically I was looking at first years because these are our new adopters into the technology, specifically in the way we do things here in the university. So I wanted to get a perception of students who are just coming into the system and try and understand how they feel and how they see things. So this is why the sample size involved 204 undergraduate students. And I used a structural equation modeling technique to analyze the data. This was coupled with, so it was SEM that I used. In terms of the actual underpinning of the study, I used what is referred to as the UKZN framework, which is a framework that's used to understand specifically how do individuals adopt into technologies. So it explains the user behavior to use these technologies and their subsequent usage behavior. So what do they think about the technology? And then how does that influence them to actually use this technology? Now this construct, the UKZN framework, uses 5 constructs to determine the use behavior. So it goes through, the first construct is our performance expectancy, the effort expectancy, the social influences that are available, the facilitating conditions that are available, and the behavioral intention to use. All of these 4 together, or rather all of these 5 together, influence whether a person is going to take up this technology or not. So based on these constructs, I constructed hypotheses that I was testing, and hence you can see H1 all the way up to H7. So I was trying to see how does performance expectancy, effort expectancy, social influence, facilitating conditions, behavior, intention to use, how do these constructs impact the use behavior of students using social media for our teaching and learning purposes? So the first thing that I did was I did a factor analysis, an exploratory factor analysis, where I was trying to actually cluster into different variables to fall into particular clusters, not to go into too much, but at the end of the day, everything fell into the 5 clusters that were used and formed the constructs of the study. This was followed up by our structural equation modeling technique, which was testing now these hypotheses that were put forward to investigate the adoption of Facebook as a social media platform for academic purposes. So SEM was more preferred because it's used to investigate general and specialized systems for the use when it comes to actually the UKZN framework. So it's kind of, it makes a correct fit. What were the results of the SEM analysis? Now, I'll speak specifically into the significant values and the estimates. The estimates actually talk to the impact of that particular variable on the dependent variable. So in this particular case, we can see there are 2 main constructs that influence the use behavior. And these constructs are behavior intention to use, BIU, and our facilitating conditions. When we actually look at the significance levels, both of them actually hold to be true. They're all significant, meaning behavior intention to use, facilitating conditions, both influence the use behavior of this particular technology, being social media. So students actually found that both of these actually influence their ability to actually use these Facebook for teaching and learning purposes. Another thing to note is that when you look at the estimates, what actually the estimates tell us is that the behavior intention to use has got a more significant, a bigger influence towards students actually adopting a technology, as compared to the second construct, the facilitating conditions, which has got a 22.9% influence towards the adoption of a technology. So to put it in a bit of lay terms here, I'd say that the results show that an improvement in behavior intention to use BIU improves the adoption of Facebook for teaching and learning purposes in university by 35.1%, respectively, and by 22.9% for an improvement in facilitating conditions. And both of these results are actually significant. So both of them are significant, the most significant one being behavior intention to use. So what does this actually tell us? What this tells us is that, first of all, these 2 constructs are actually important whenever we're thinking of going using a particular platform, a particular technology for teaching and learning. We need to consider behavior intention issues, aspects. We also need to consider facilitating conditions. Now, behavior intention seems to be the most significant aspect for consideration when adopting social media platforms like Facebook for teaching and learning purposes in the university. The behavior intention to use, behavior intention for students is most significantly influenced by the effort that the student feels they need to apply towards this technology. This finding is in line with finding from other authors who in a study, another author, Williams, who in a study of 175 articles made use of the UKZN framework, also found that behavior intention is one of the most significant aspects. So whenever we are thinking of bringing up a technology, universities should be looking at things like, first of all, do we have the technical gadgets, the laptops, the smartphones, the tablets for our students to actually use? And we can see that this is one of the steps that was taken. Secondly, is we want to see the second facilitating condition, things like infrastructure. Do we actually have the infrastructure to support this, this direction that we want to take? So, and right now you can see one of the most issues that we are facing is the idea of not so great infrastructure, and we have to actually mitigate this by actually asking our students to come into the university and make use of this online learning platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I have stuck within 15 minutes. Now let me catch my breath and open it up for comments, contributions.
Thank you very much. And you actually did stick within 10 minutes. So I'm quite impressed with that. I see Prim has popped her hand up very quickly. So Prim, would you like to go ahead and ask a question?
Thank you so much, Patsy, and thank you, Dr. Jerry. That was most informative. A little bit over my head with the stats, but we'll get there eventually. My question to you, Joseph, is
yes.
Students, though, are told to use the official platform at UKZN, which is LMS through Moodle. So are we saying, or is the study suggesting that we need to review if Moodle is, as an LMS, is it the best form of a learning management system? Should we then not consider Instagram or Facebook, or is that going to become too overwhelming? What's your thoughts about that? Thanks, Joseph.
Okay, thank you very much. So I would say that there are two things. It's the same concept with what we've been facing before of follow the students where they actually are found. Now, LMSs are great. LMSs have got their purpose. Excellent. For instance, for running assessments, perfect. You know, for running a lot of these things like quizzes and so on, perfect. But the fact is, you know, there's a school of academics who feel that students should actually be followed into the environment. And I'm one of those. For instance, if you remember very well, when we started, there was all this, everybody should be on Moodle. And I said, well, I like WhatsApp because I know that the students are on WhatsApp. I know that it takes the least amount of data. So a student in the most rural of places is able to actually participate. Now, if I go somewhere where it's data intensive, it's great, it's perfect, but it's data intensive, I know that, you know, I'm defeating the purpose. I'll be there alone. So I think what is important is a blend. And it's important also not to turn a blind eye to what actually our students are doing. You know, it's one thing to make these great platforms, but if students are not adopting it, or there's somewhere else where they actually found in greater numbers, maybe consider using that tool as well as a secondary platform for teaching and learning.
Thank you.
If I can just jump in and ask a question, I was interested, I think it was on your last slide, your conclusion.
Right.
Maybe you can jump back to that. You talk about these, which are, I would have thought, you know, just trying to understand, you talk about behavioral intention to use, and then you look at, I think it's facilitating conditions.
Yes.
And I would have thought that these two technical gadgets and infrastructure fall under that second group, which I know you also found to be significant.
Facilitating conditions.
Yeah, what is the behavioral intention to use? What would, you know, in layman's terms, what would fall under that? Because that was even above the facilitating conditions, was it not?
Okay, yes. So behavior intention to use BIU basically we're looking at something like the degree to which an individual would believe that they will engage in a given particular behavior. So I believe that, you know, I can drive a car, but I definitely don't believe that I can fly a plane. You know, I believe I can go into a shop, you know, so behavior intention to use it is basically more of the last stage before you actually do it. You know, let me make a phone call. Yes, because I've got the feeling that I know how to use it for a cell phone. So mostly and this speaking to this actually, and maybe linking it to the previous question, you see, when you're looking at LMSs, a lot of students, it's Greek. Yes, it's nice. Yes, it's online, but it's Greek. But when you say, oh, go on WhatsApp and go into a class, join a group there and we'll conversate there. Students, oh yeah, I know how to do that. It's easy. So the behavior intention to use is much higher when you're looking at such kind of tools as compared to these more complex ones.
I certainly agree that would probably be the case. You mentioned earlier that you were particularly focusing on first years. Yes. And I think in 2020, it was particularly difficult for our first years because they were not familiar with the LMS.
Absolutely, yes.
They would have been a lot more familiar with something like WhatsApp and Facebook than they were with the LMS. And just one thing though, that the LMS is data free for the students. So I think that's something that's also got missed by a lot of staff in this move to the online, is that there is a number of platforms that are data free for the students. And the LMS is one of those. And I think students need a greater understanding of, students and staff need a greater understanding of what is data free, because data is definitely a impediment to the online endeavor. Can you stop sharing and then we can see if there's any other questions? I see, let me see if there's any other hands up. Fakili.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sherwell.
We've got about 4 minutes left on this and then we need to move on.
No problem. I just wanted to say, I mean, I think in terms of the study, the study that we've done in the School of Social Sciences, clearly it shows that blended approaches are useful, you know, and I like your conclusion as well in terms of the behavioral intention to use, that intention is only significant in as far as it is clear that the infrastructure is going to be there. But I just wanted to ask a question about your experience in terms of using software like Facebook, Instagram, and so on, like I think Prem Naidu has asked, in relation to free higher education, but also protecting the university, because those platforms tend to have open access to people who are not necessarily even registered students of the university. In other words, it actually does make that information accessible to the public domain in many ways than one.
I think, let me just make it clear, I don't use Instagram. I've got no Instagram account. That was just an example of the social media platforms. With regards to that, yes, so obviously there's an aspect of security, and that's one of the reasons why the university drives you to actually use protected kind of environments like our LMSs and so on and so forth. So but more this shows is the idea that, you know what, I am more comfortable in my space. So whatever interventions that we are thinking of should be thinking around those kind of areas, and obviously taking into aspects of security, because, you know, these days, I mean, even our Zooms constantly are getting hacked. So yes, security is an aspect that should be taken into consideration. But some of these findings, I think, inform further actions. Maybe let me put it that way. Thanks.
Thank you. Fakili, are you covered?
I'm covered. Thank you very much, Dr. Sherwell.
Thank you. Well, if there's no further questions, thank you, Joseph, and I think we can move on. I was just looking that Dr. Anthony Marsha was the next person, but I don't see him in the group. Am I missing something? Is Dr. Marsha here? I do know that Elaine has mentioned that she has has to leave by 2:30. So if we don't have Dr. Anthony here, then I think I might just move the program around a little bit and let Dr. Anthony, let Elaine come in. Is that okay?
Sounds perfect. Thanks. That sounds perfect, Patsy. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Prim. So Elaine, then it would be over to you. Sorry. So we have Elaine Park with us, and her paper is titled "The US Chemistry's Professor's Perspective on Teaching First-Year Introductory Courses During the COVID-19 Pandemic, Sparking an International Discussion on the Global Challenges and Solutions." I think this follows on quite nicely from the previous presentation. So Elaine, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that introduction. I will go ahead and share my screen.
Thank you.
Get us started. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Hi, everyone. So I should provide a quick introduction of myself. Probably from my accent, you can tell that I'm not from South Africa. I am from the US. I'm from a small university called Rollins College in Florida of the United States. I arrived here at the end of August in the midst of this pandemic through a Fulbright scholarship that allowed me to be here or allows me to be here till April of next year. And so I'm located at UKZN's Westville campus primarily, but working with the Howard campus students as well, specifically in the chemistry and physics school. And I'm honored to be here to be able to maybe have a conversation that would benefit both of our universities and give us some ideas on how we can sort of refine our teaching approaches. So to start off, I thought it would be helpful to give you a snapshot of Rollins, where it come from. So just to give you an idea, the university is very, very small. Just from the population of 2,127 students, you can gather that. That's in the entire college. It is specifically mostly undergraduate students. We do have a business program that is a minor part of our student body, but mostly our undergraduate students. It is a four-year college, which is different, I think, from South African's education system a bit, but the breakdown of the students here that you see, we have 60% of the student body identify as female, and then a breakdown here of the ethnic backgrounds. You see 20% Hispanic, and then you have 6% Black and 4% Asian. And so in total, we have, about 30% of our body that represent as what we call the BIPOC. The BIPOC is the acronym that we use, but essentially the underrepresented minority groups that attend our college. We have 50% of our student body coming from Florida, so sort of in our backyard or local, so to speak. And then 30% of our students are Pell recipients. Pell is an acronym that we use for essentially students who need extra financial aid. In the US, most of our students pay for the tuition, right? And I think that's a different system from outside of the US. But essentially that means that we have students coming from the lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and the majority of our students come from a more affluent background. Then you have, just for, an idea of what our degrees are, it's Bachelor's of Arts specifically. We have that small classroom dynamic that I mentioned of 11:1 of a ratio. And we have this strong emphasis on service learning. So this idea that you take your majors out beyond the campus and contribute to society. And then you have undergraduates that have a unique experience to do firsthand research that is innovative. So anywhere from, this is not just exclusive to STEM. The picture in the upper right is of me doing research with my student. And typically we start off in the summer and do 100% research. And I personally train them as a professor. We don't have graduate students in our program, so research is really a firsthand direct collaboration between the faculty and the student. This is also true for art history, political science, any other field in our school. The students get to do firsthand research and publish with the faculty, which is really great. I should also note here in the middle, Winter Park is the name of the town in Florida. The Mickey Mouse sign is there because Winter Park is embedded in Orlando. And if for those of you who've been to Florida, Disney World and Universal Studios is one of our main attractions to the state. And that can be quite a distraction to our students as well. So that's just a sidebar on that. For our students, our goal for our faculty is that we support and make sure we prepare our students really well at the undergraduate level so that by the time they get to the graduate level, that transition is as smooth as possible. And that's why that research component is heavily integrated into our curriculum. So I should also note that as I go on to this presentation that there are actually there's not too much data that I can offer in this particular presentation with regard to, all the regulation bodies that we have to go through in order to divulge any data. I don't have that to offer, but I do have sort of an anecdotal version of my perspective and my experiences in the States. So hopefully that will still be interesting to offer. right, so the next slide here is back in 2020, I just wanted to kind of give you a quick snapshot of Rollins' response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Back in March, I think everyone went fully online. So there was a blend, there's just a mix of different pedagogical approaches. But in the beginning, I think we were, like UKZN is doing now, it was 100% online. Back in the fall of 2020, we went back to face-to-face, and with the majority of our students coming back to residential, regardless of their discipline. We did have a small proportion of the student body, either by choice or not by choice, if they were stuck in a country where they could choose to be a virtual student. And so we had, as professors, been forced to still teach blended, right? So we had both face-to-face students and online students joining in. And so we had that split attention where we were video recording live with synchronous lessons where they had a virtual student on the other end, and as well as students physically in front of me. And so there was that split attention as the instructor. But in terms of the list of pedagogies here, they're not unfamiliar to us, right? We talked a lot about blended learning already. The thing that might be kind of unique, and I heard that at UKZN, there is, depending on discipline, maybe outdoor classes that have been held. But this is a couple of pictures of the top picture in the upper right is of me in an actual outdoor classroom for my first year students. That contact of physically being in the same space was really helpful for my first year students, as we can all imagine. Just being physically in front of someone holds them accountable for the material, and they can't just hide away behind the camera. And so it was really nice to have that contact. The bottom photo on the right here, you can see a picture where the students that are sitting down don't look like students, and they in fact are not. They were faculty. You see some gray heads in the audience. What's kind of unique about this, this particular photo is that often I think when you have more experienced senior faculty, they may not be necessarily participating in a workshop, but I think the pandemic last year has really thrown everyone through a loop. And this workshop that I held for the faculty who are a little bit more seasoned than I am in teaching, they actually were there because they were opting for the outdoor classroom that felt safer in the context of the pandemic without the vaccine. And so a lot of the older, higher risk faculty decided to opt for the outdoor classroom and therefore had some technical difficulties. And so like UKZN, we offered workshops where we can brainstorm and partner with each other and sort of share our skill sets that are different. And so everyone has their own devices here, as you can see in the picture. In place of a projector, in place of a physical whiteboard in front of us, we had to have some sort of modality to look at a PowerPoint together, or whatever that common space is, as a point of discussion. And so this is what we sort of remedied in the situation of the 2020 timeline. Of course, with the vaccination rollout, now our students currently in 2021, Rollins has, I think, a majority of the students and faculty vaccinated. And so pretty much it is 100% face-to-face now on our campus. And obviously I'm not there right now to give you firsthand experience, but I can tell you that as we go on in this presentation that there are lots of rooms for improvement even then, because we do have sort of a scaffolding issue of these students coming in with primarily online teaching experience in the last couple of years of their high school. And so I will move on to the next slide. I just want to check on the time here. How are we on time? Okay. All right. Sorry, Patsy, did you want to say something?
No, sorry, I just noted myself that I didn't make a note of when you started, but I think you've got at least 5 minutes more. Sorry.
Yes, I do.
I neglected my duties here. I didn't make a note of when you started.
No problem. So I thought I'd share a little bit of a Rollins student first year journey. As the title suggests, we're talking about the first year experience a little bit. We're focusing more on that. And so I wanted to share a little bit of, Rollins experience so that from what I can gather here in my experience of talking to colleagues at UKZN, it is somewhat comforting to know that US students are going through similar things, that faculty are struggling with similar things. And so I wanted to share this first year journey with you as a way to maybe look at this and say, okay, there are some similarities to a UKZN student's journey, and then maybe also note the differences. So one of the things that we're doing as an institution is we're partnering with a lot of colleges, other colleges in the United States currently, to have a discussion about that first year experience in STEM. And while this is STEM specific, I think there are a lot of things here that you can still probably relate to even outside of the STEM field. So obviously a student's journey starts with admissions, recruiting, then in our case, at least, there's a huge staff counselor role where they advise the student on what is the best fit, which college is the best fit. They get to us, they do orientation. Usually they get into that first classroom lab experience, and they experience that first hurdle or their first failure. I put quotes here, remedies and quotes here, because a lot of students will look at the resources that have been provided to them from day one, but use them as remedies, because only until they fail will they look at those resources as something that they should consider. And so from a student's perspective, I put 3 and 4 flags sort of after the failure, as, okay, well, as a student, I just failed my first test or quiz. Like, how do I approach this? And tutoring, office hours, advising, it's just endless number of resources, even in the non-academic remedy list. But I won't go through all of that in greater detail. I just wanted to kind of note that as faculty, what we noticed was, what is something that we can do that's different from like a student's approach to be reactive to their first failure? What is something that we can do on the front end to be proactive and sort of walk students through how they should approach that first failure when that inevitably comes? And so we have in purple here, just a lot of new additions here, but one of the things that I wanted to focus on here as faculty, we have most control over our individual classrooms, right? And so the starred first bullet on the left, research integrated courses, curricular scaffolding, teaching modality, those are all things that we can sort of refine as we go to figure out what is the best fit for our discipline, what is the best fit for that student cohort coming in that instant in time, because we are finding that there's almost greater issues with that first year population coming in now versus last year. And I think that's because of the added online sort of maybe lack of preparation or training that they're getting that comes with its own set of unique challenges. Here I wrote positive STEM culture, building a cohort experience, like making sure that they know they're not struggling on their own. And this, I think, does touch into one of the faculty members earlier just talked about the concern of cheating. So when we promote collaboration and asking them to do group work, what are some things that how do we promote good group work, right? We don't want an increased cheating in that scenario. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm just going to continue moving on. So in the university context between Rollins and UKZN, I wanted to highlight some of the similarities up here. Weather is one of them. Durban is not unlike Orlando, Florida, which has its pluses when it comes to options like outdoor classrooms. Supplemental instruction is also something that we offer, and then pandemic fatigue, right? And one of the things that I quickly noted as soon as I got here was globally, faculty staff are just as tired as students. And this picture just kind of made me laugh a little bit, because I think we're constantly asked to change our curriculum, but we are still exhausted. So keeping that in mind. And then the weaker high school preparation. I've heard from conversations here in South Africa that this is also an issue, just as much as it is an issue in the US. This graphic just shows that 78% of college faculty, along with 47% of undergraduates who are in college, say that they felt like they're inadequately prepared. Differences here, they're a list. Smaller class sizes at Rollins versus the larger class sizes at UKZN probably depends on the discipline there. 100% in-person lectures and labs now, but right now at UKZN is hybrid. And then differences with United States resources versus South Africa or lack of resources with power and access to internet. And then you have undergraduates gaining research experience earlier at the first year level versus maybe a little bit later at UKZN. Now I'm going to move on to sort of share a quick snapshot of some of the information I think this is not unfamiliar to you all, so I'm probably going to breeze through this just to say that a graphic like this with quotes as listed here is not unfamiliar to us. It's just in a different context. Maybe different topics might show up, but overall similar. And I'm just going to breeze through. I will just highlight in table 5 here. This is a study that was done in 2021 this year. And the top, what the students did not like, the top contender here was no reply. And as the keynote speaker noted about timely feedback, it's in line with what we already know. Difficulty in engaging students. We have faculty who need to adjust to a new modality, institutions lost money. I mean, these are all infrastructure problems that we need to address. The last thing here, I think we've all probably thought about it, but just something that I wanted to bring to the forefront of our minds is kicking the can down the road mentality. If we do that if we don't do a certain lab for the first years, then is that going to show up as a problem in the second year and then third year and so forth? So one of the things that I wanted to address, and I'm going to skip through this slide, is thinking about how do we address that at earliest on, and how do we challenge students and not change standards? Here, one of the things that I'll just note here is synchronous versus active learning blended. I will say when I taught my outdoor classroom, majority of my time was synchronous, with the minority of my time asynchronous. What was really nice about the setting is to do group work with my students and be able to circulate around the outdoor classroom. Some solutions that I wanted to just sort of put out there for UKZN is all something that some work is already being done. And I'm sure it depends on the discipline. This is just based on my first observation of what I'm noticing in chemistry. And let me see this one here, the third bullet, integrating more real world applications for abstract topics. This paper is a really neat one just for specifically my discipline, but that concept of applying something that is very tangible to our students and bringing it into our abstract concepts is, I think, a pedagogical practice that I'm sure all of us partake in. And
sorry, Elaine, I'm going to have to ask you to try and wrap up so we have some time for questions.
Yeah, that sounds good. So that's actually my last slide. I just wanted to insert a photo of my colleagues here at UKZN and of my this sort of down on the farther right, you'll see a photo of my chemistry department, and we try to mimic the Brady Bunch snapshot of with our Zoom call. And I think I'll just rest on this last slide for discussion. I think we're all nostalgic for maybe a pre-pandemic kind of classroom dynamic. And this is a photo that was taken years ago. But one of the things that I wanted to sort of leave you with is maybe the idea of what changes would you implement and what's the right mix and proportion for synchronous, asynchronous, and maybe thinking about more what does a low stake assignment look like for our students in the context of the pandemic and teaching. But thank you all for your time. I apologize for speeding through that last couple of slides, but I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Can we have some questions for Elaine? That was most interesting, which is why I forgot my duties as the chair to keep track of the time. Has anybody got any questions?
Or comments?
Or comments, yes. Vino, I see your hand.
Thank you, Elaine, for reflecting on your experiences at Rollins. And so I have more of a comment, not a question. And also, as well as giving us some insight into your views of chemistry at UKZN. It is really valuable getting an outsider perspective on how we compare to other institutions. So it was a great talk, and thank you for that.
Thanks, Vino.
Fikile.
Thank you very much, Elaine, for sharing, your experiences. Very, very informative. I think that the issue of privilege is really something that I appreciate that you're highlighting, and perhaps my responses to the last question about what institutional changes would be needed to help support some of our faculties to implement good pedagogy. One of the proposals that we put forward, and we continue to do so, is that the environment in South Africa is different comparative to other jurisdictions globally, in a sense that South Africa is still very much dealing with a social fabric that has been eroded over time because of the systems of oppression, of apartheid and colonization, and so on, which is why you will see in your study that underprivilegedness still exists very much, of course, displaying themselves in the form of access to data. So we were proposing that at an institutional level, perhaps we need to embrace a social pedagogical approach, which means that if we are going to continue with blended learning that involves online learning where students have to study from home and communities, perhaps we need to have a university that also has a social responsibility, in a sense that the kinds of resources that we put into what we call a student needs to be a kind of resource that recognizes not just the student as an individual, but a student as a part of a community and a student as a part of home. For example, if the university offers a data package to a student, perhaps let it be uncapped, because it is inevitable that when a student has got that router at home, it's not going to be used by a student alone. It's a resource that's going to be shared with other family members who, by virtue of not having the privilege to have access to internet, whether we like it or not, it is going to be depleted earlier in the month because the student will share it with an auntie, with a cousin and a brother and so on, perhaps with the neighbors as well. So we need a university that would recognize that kind of a social structure that is very skewed and unequal. So issues of equity means that we need to invest in digital equity in those ways. And it means then that as an institution, we would need to engage the state. We would need to engage the ministries of education to say that the role of a university in a country like South Africa, perhaps on the African continent as well, is beyond just teaching and learning, but it is about reorganizing our social fabric as well. And that includes how we give data. Issues of food. One of the proposals we made was that the majority of our students access NSFAS. How would it be, for instance, that the kind of budgets that we're going towards food for students is redistributed in ways that students get vouchers? I think one of the keynotes spoke about that experience in Australia, to say that students in Australia during COVID got about $1,000 just to be able to mitigate those social factors. So something like a basic need voucher that would make sure that when a student has to go online, a student is not hungry. So we deal with those issues. Inevitably, that would obviously benefit the family, but also positively speaking, it will then reorganize the social fabric of that family and perhaps of that community as well. So those are some of the institutional suggestions that we have made over time. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. I mean, Elaine has highlighted a number of similarities, and sometimes it's quite heartening to hear that we are so similar. But I think one of the main differences that I picked up on, in addition to the things that Fikile has raised, is just the size. I mean, when you are dealing with such a limited number of students, you can try things. You know that we just would be outside the realm of possibility for us, which.
Yeah, I failed to note that my experiences with colleagues and collaborators at MIT and Columbia University are sort of on the bigger scale of, and then I have collaborators that are really one of the largest universities in the States, in Florida, just down the road. And so I have constant conversations with them as well, but they're, in terms of the struggles, yes, there is going to be a difference for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean that. But as I say, and I think that's one thing that this pandemic has kind of brought to the fore really is how similar a lot of the issues are that we do face internationally, because one has been enabled to join into webinars with colleagues in all over the world, and it gives one some heart in a way that there are so many similarities. I think it's 13:45 now, and I see according to the program we were meant to finish at 2, but then we started late. We have missed, I still don't see Dr. Marsha available. So I think I'm going to now move on to Doug Engelbrecht, who was with us. Yes, he's still with us. And Doug, don't take heart. I'm not going to give you only 15 minutes. So I think we will go on for our full, what it would be 25 minutes. That would take us 10 minutes into the next sort of session, but I think they would be expecting that, as we did start a little bit late. So if I can introduce you to Doug Engelbrecht, an old friend of mine, who's got a very interesting title to his paper, which is Damaged Goods: Undoing Learner Disaffection Brought About by Exosystem Estrangement. And I'm most interested to hear what you have to say, Doug. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Betsy. I'm still trying to, I'll concede, I'm still trying to get my head around the fact that I have more students in my 4th year engineering business class than Rollins College has teaching staff. And converted to South African rands, a degree, a 4-year degree, if we presume it took you 4 years, would cost you 4 million South African rand. So we're talking different contexts and different environments here, and that is I will concede, I am gobsmacked. Be that as it may, it's not about playing into my hands, but the point over here is that there's this is what the exosystem is, and I'll put that into perspective for you. So I'm going to share my screen with you and get cracking with this. To navigate my way, if you can just give me one moment while I call this presentation up so I can click through and then retrieve me. Okay. The title will start to make sense because I have been particular about my use of the words that you see on the page, and it'll become very, very clear in due course. I'm going to say that we'll work to an agenda, and that's simply so that I can monitor time as we go, and also try and make this as comprehensible as possible, because this is, after all, just a snapshot. So I will describe a phenomenon for you. I will, and I think that's been described. Fikile has done that, and Elaine has done that, and I will problematize that in terms of what I've chosen to do as a phenomenological exercise or research, body of research. I will frame it in theory, which we've not heard much of today, and tell you what I did to achieve a resolution, and how I then operationalized that, and then I'll present what is not a discussion, but just my thoughts on my experience over this last semester, and then give you opportunity for questions and answers. You see again and again the picture in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen of the prefrontal lobe. Just to point out to you that is the kind of modern human brain, most recently developed in the last few 100,000 years, and that's why we're here. Let me be quite blunt, straightforward, frank. What we're doing is fiddling with that part of the brain, because that's where executive control sits, and that's where long-term memory sits, and that's where empathy and behavior and moral development sit, and that, after all, surely is what we're about as teaching fraternity. We're about cognitive development. We're about not about putting knowledge into people's heads. We're about changing the way their minds work. That's human development, after all, cognitive development. That's what we actually do. And I think it's very easy to lose sight of that. What we're trying to do is turn out a better human being who's able to be a productive, contributing member of society. So the phenomenon itself is first generation university students, which in South Africa is a far cry from the kind of heritability which I suspect is something which many of what Sid referred to as sandstone college students and what we would otherwise call Ivy Leagues and what Rollins College evidently is. We don't have to go into detail about this. What Fikile pointed out to us as a snapshot of 2020 history is really no different to what 2019 was, or what 2021 is, or what 2030 is likely to be, because in 2030 we are going to be reaping the whirlwind which the pandemic has sown as those students come to us. So first generation students, the transition is part of the phenomenon from secondary education to university. When you make that transition, you are moving from what is anything from 400 to 1,000 children in a school, and there is a herd mentality, and there's exceptional structure. And if you don't know what's going on, you can follow the kid in front of you. I remember my first day at the University of Natal on the Howard College campus as a 20-year-old back in 1982. I couldn't find a toilet on my first day. And I can tell you that was a bit of an issue. I kind of integrated well enough. But that's the distinction we have here. There's school and university are very, very different things. It's also impersonal, and this is something we have to accept. And I know Fikile and I expect that I will be meeting with her because I think we have views to share here. There's a marginalization which just the distinction between what happens north of the equator and what happens south of the equator. What happens beyond Africa, in other words. There's a distinction over there, a marginalization of vulnerable people. Everyone here is by and large peripheral, and that is something which gets under my skin a little bit. But it's we have to find solutions to that, and I don't know necessarily that my employer organization has managed to do that adequately. That peripherality of the student body means that they are very, very precariously placed, and that is an issue. And then we've seen the stats, and we've heard it all day long. We're talking here about the nature of the beast, and it's an unpleasant one. We've heard, and it's been confirmed, that we're not talking a student body of digital natives. We're talking people who are incredibly disaffected because they're trying to approach all of this not on their iPhone 13s, but on their 1,000 Rand cell phones, which are not really an adequate way to engage with any kind of teaching and learning environment. So the prospect, in other words, of a favorable learning experience we have to accept over here is pretty negligible. So were I to problematize that situation, I start off over here, and I will read this, if you'll forgive me. The university represents, and will do for some time, a fundamental ecosystem constituent in the lives of students. We are fashioning our students' lives from cradle to grave, really, long before they get to the university. Much as it was for me, I came to the University of Natal simply because it was 20 miles from home. There was no other way, there was no other place I was going to go to university. It was not remotely a prospect that I would think of going to Cape Town or to Stellenbosch or to Pretoria or to anywhere else in South Africa. I went where the university was. And so it is in our Valley of 1,000 Hills, which must then have 999 troughs. We are drawing people who will attempt to come here, and if they don't come here, then they hope that the Central Applications Office will send them to DUT, and then perhaps their final port of call is Unizel. But I don't mean to be snobby in any way, certainly not at all. So there's the issue, and that's something I illustrate over here. This kind of cradle to grave exercise without using headstones. There's an interface. Students become student customers, and I have a bit of a problem thinking of students as customers because they're not customers. I think that the citizenry of the country are customers. I think that employer organizations are customers. But if I move on from this, I say we turn people into what I refer to as learner initiates, and over the duration, the chronology, the 4, 5, sometimes 6 and more years that they spend here, they will become what we can think of as graduate prospects. And I have a couple that I'm teaching this year, and I can see the ebb and flow of their emotions as they try and get to the end of their degrees. The interface itself is about instructors, some good, some bad, and way too many indifferent, but we'll come back to that. Curriculum, some good, some bad, way too many indifferent. Facilities, some good, some bad. Administration, sometimes good, sometimes bad, frequently indifferent. And a hidden curriculum, which one must anticipate in an organization like this with near on 50,000 students and near on 5,000 staff, is going to represent a very, very different social place, and that's why I illustrate this with the theatre masks, because there are certainly ups and downs. The problem itself is our systems don't work, and I refute if any of you try and rebut this that our systems are great. I think what the pandemic has done is obligate us to work on registering students, to bringing them on as student customers, and that's been a good thing. And it's still particularly imperfect. And I've been registering students for over a decade now. Our curricula are imported, and we are largely indifferent. So I frame this in order to move on. And here's how I frame it, and I'll give you opportunity to read Uri Bronfenbrenner's quote. Patsy and I do go back a long way, and I think she knows me as a bit of a zealot in this regard. I believe has always been that with children of university age, what I give, the universe will give back. I have taught for quite some time. I spent 6 months teaching in a high school some years ago. The decided teaching was not for me, but anyway, here I am. So what he points out, and the critical things here, is this notion, and I, for the purpose of brevity, I will speed up. We're talking about a nested microsystem, okay, which again, Fikile has demonstrated for us, so we don't have to dwell on this. There's a mesosystem interaction, and the mesosystem interaction is the child's immediate conditions, their immediate environment. I've spent a lot of time in the rural areas of KwaZulu-Natal. I've lived in every district municipality of this province and worked in them. And I know the nature of schools, and the nature of life in rural areas, the nature of being what Fikile referred to as our black majority. It certainly doesn't mediate well with the exosystem, which is our university and the others and every other institution which people of all colors and all living standards measures have to interact with. All of that influences learner development, and that's what Bronfenbrenner brings to us. I know that there are alternatives, and Piaget and Bandura and Vygotsky all make a contribution, but I've selected for my framing Bronfenbrenner's model, which is simply this stacking of the child, the learner initiate, in other words, within their microsystem of their immediate household, within the mesosystem of their larger community, the culture. It depends on whether you have bitumen or tar on your roads, or whether it's a dirt road, and whether there's a dead politician on it or not by the end of the weekend, recognizing that in KwaZulu-Natal, we lose a politician a weekend. Those are just the stats. That's the dreadfulness of it. The exosystem is us, and the macrosystem is what South Africa is, and the chronosystem is the changes that occur over time, and that is an issue in terms of how we raise kids through our system. So within that frame of reference, when Bronfenbrenner says that there's a process of progressively more complex reciprocal interaction, that's what I work on. That's where I go. It's highlighted in blue over here. If we are to make any progress then we have to focus on the student customers, the learner initiates. We have to focus on the context. We have to understand the nature of the development outcomes that are possible here in a university, which the state will pay for, as opposed to someone forking out $70,000 a year. Each of those factors is received and interpreted differently, and we have to be aware of that. So I conceptualize resolution over here by saying that if we are to get into
Dad, 5 minutes.
Thank you. The zone of proximal development for candidates, what we are stepping into is the space where we can make a difference, which I've illustrated over there. We can't go beyond that. We have to cut our suit to fit our cloth. So the setting where I have investigated this phenomenologically is effectively my first year class, which is a large one. It's about 650 kids, which I have on 2 different sites. First year students who have, for the greater part, never actually seen the university. What I've wanted to do was overcome for students what they encounter as problems. I have figured that if this is to work, then what I must do is lead this show, and it has to be student focused and it has to be compensatory. And that then gives rise to 4 different things. And I'm going to deal with each of those in turn very rapidly. So if you haven't absorbed them, there's not a problem. The first thing is this: there is a disaffection arising from the fact that you can't become a student customer very easily. And that is so terribly frustrating, that it's impossible to register over here sometimes for some kids, that they can't change their curriculums, that they're given the most rotten advice. I consider that to be a bit of a treachery. And then clearly the ability to access things. These are, as I say, not digital natives. They battle to fit into all of this. I have students who can't access Zoom recordings because they can't cut and paste the URL into a device. And that's probably because the device is no more than R1,000 Rand cell phone. The epistemological framing is awful. They've been, students by and large are directed to memorize bullet points. That's because their reading skills are particularly poor. And unfortunately, there's a teacher body who accedes to this. We import our curriculum, and the curriculum is usually the table of contents of an American textbook. And quite frankly, the nature of the ability, the capacity of a student at Rollins College, for example, to go through a textbook is very distinct from that of your average South African student. I think it's a treachery also to do this cult of 13 thing. So our kids can't read. They don't read. We know that. The stats are there. The Pearls tells us our kids can't read for meaning at age 10 in their mother tongue. And they can't use the LMS, not just because they can't use it, but because the instructors can't navigate it. So they bomb out. The assessments are difficult to get to. What I've sought to do is change all of this. And when I reflect on this, and Patsy, I'll bring this to a close in a minute, I'm creating an objective to effectively fix things. And certainly within my impact zone, I have demonstrated that I can do that. The evidence I have is favorable, but it is going to have to measure. It will be measured long term. In other words, I'm talking over here at some sort of tracer study, a longitudinal study. I'm also going to point out that what I'm doing is true quality control, which is something that the university cannot do because our QPA processes are a little lame. And finally, I'm going to say that if you were to ask this question, I'd say absolutely. For this question, I'd say I'm not quite sure, but probably not. Would I do it again unreservedly? And can I build a base of evidence? Yes, I can. And can I overcome institutional inertia? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. So if there's time for questions, I'm quite happy to take them.
I think it is most interesting. So let's see if we can have 5 minutes. I think your unpacking of the problem that we face can seem quite overwhelming, can make the problem seem quite overwhelming. but I am interested that you have found a space to try a different approach, which, yes, over time, I would be very interested for you to share that the outcomes and the success of, and I'm sure it will be successful, the success of what you are trying. Prim.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Doug Engelbrecht. I think it's more a comment. You've been honest in this presentation, and I think that's what some of us lack as academics, the awareness of where our student body is coming from, whether it's the first year cohort, second year, third year. And I think once we have that awareness, we can try and do something about it. So I do believe in being active and proactive. I don't believe inertia is going to solve it. And I think it always starts with asking our questions, our students, what are their needs? What are their concerns? What are the issues? And starting from a place of their needs, issues, and concerns, and attempting to address it with help from other support sectors within the university. So thank you, Dr. Doug. Thank you.
Thanks, Prim. Prim's hand's down, and I don't see anyone else's hand up.
Yes, now I've muted myself, and so I was going to say, any other questions? Fikile wants to have a comment again. Fikile?
Thank you very much. I mean, my goodness, it was just such a pleasure to listen to you, Dr. Doug. I resonate with most of the sentiments, and I appreciate the eco model design, because that's exactly where we should be. That's exactly where we should be. I absolutely 110% concur with you. I have no words, and I just want to say, I hope that our institutions get this. It is time for going there.
Thank you.
I think you've silenced everybody, Doug.
I know, but it's a bad habit.
I know the particular, and perhaps I shouldn't even say this, because I want to say the particular difficulties you have faced with your group, but the reality is that is all of our reality. So it's not just your group and your first year cohort. And I think, however, if we could address it with the first year cohort, perhaps it would make the journey for those students in the years that follow that first year so much.
I think that's the critical thing. That's the critical thing. And I will follow this. I have not ever thought that I would live long enough, kind of thing, to undertake any kind of longitudinal study, but this has to be traced. And I do maintain, when I first came onto permanent staff back in 2009, I think there was a period of time where I taught students at first year, second year, and third year, and then had some of them in my honors classes as well. And I know it's certainly very anecdotal now, but the point is, I was able to guide kids. You remember that Ruth Searle used to point out that we had to work out whether we wanted to be the sage on the stage or the guide on the side. We have no choice here with these kids in this circumstance to be that guy, that sage on the stage. We are the very important person in their lives, and we serve as the role model. And if we don't accept that responsibility, then we are perpetrating a crime against our humanity, certainly in this country. So that's my philosophical bent on this whole thing. I've seen it work, I've made it work, but frankly, I can't get the university to listen, because our processes aren't really here, and that's a difficult thing as well. So it does render me a little despondent. It's one of those things. It's one of those things.
It does require a significant shift in focus, and your 13-week thing really spoke to me and made me think, because I think we do get locked into that 13 weeks, 13 chapters, and that's not helping, given the ecosystem that you have reflected on. So thank you very much, and thank you to all of the participants who've joined this session and stayed with us. I think we've had very interesting discussions. Perhaps we haven't solved too many problems, but at least we've unpacked, I think we've unpacked very well the situation in which we find ourselves, and perhaps it gives us some impetus for sharing ideas further, so that we can begin to make a difference in these, understanding our students better and making a difference in their lives, which is, I think, all the objective of all of us, particularly and especially, I think, those of us that find ourselves here today. So thank you very much for that. And this session will now be closed, and you will rejoin the main session with the, I presume, the link you had previously. So enjoy the rest of the day further. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's it.
It's a great pleasure.
Thank you.
And bye, everyone.